Throughout the Great Depression, American families survived on 30 dinners that cost less than $1. Dinners that made from stretched ground beef and whatever ingredients they could afford. Every meal was cooked in cast iron, baked in wood-fired ovens, and shared around crowded tables. Then, quietly, they disappeared from American kitchens. Number 7 is made with flour and water. These are 30 forgotten dinners that carried America through its hardest decade. 6-layer shipwreck casserole got its name because everything just got thrown together like a wrecked ship. Women layered raw sliced potatoes on the bottom of a deep pan. Uncooked rice went on top of the potatoes. Raw ground beef crumbled over the rice. Chopped onions scattered across the beef. Sliced carrots added another layer. The final layer was tomato soup, poured straight from the can over everything. Nothing got cooked beforehand. The whole pan went into the oven, covered for 2 hours at 350 degrees. The ingredients cooked together and created their own gravy. The rice absorbed the tomato soup and beef juices. Everything softened and melded into one complete meal. It cost about 25 cents to feed a family of 6. The casserole was filling, hot, and required almost no work. After the Depression ended, women wanted fancier casseroles with cream soups and cheese. The humble shipwreck seemed too plain. Today, nobody remembers this layered dinner. Meatloaf during the Depression looked nothing like meatloaf today. Women stretched 1 pound of ground beef to feed 8 people by adding everything they could find. Stale bread soaked in milk became the main filler. Oatmeal, crackers, and even cooked rice mixed into the meat. 1 egg bound it together. Chopped onions added flavor. The mixture was more bread than meat. You could barely taste the beef. Women shaped it into a loaf and baked it for an hour. Ketchup brushed on top made it look better. The loaf sliced like bread and tasted bland but filled stomachs. It cost 25 cents for the whole thing. Families ate meatloaf twice a week because ground beef was the cheapest meat available. After prosperity returned, meatloaf stayed popular, but the ratio changed. Modern meatloaf uses mostly meat with just a little bread. Depression meatloaf was mostly bread with just a little meat. Nobody makes it that way anymore.
Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video.
Mock chicken legs fooled children into thinking they were eating real chicken. Butchers sold pork shoulder cubes for pennies because nobody wanted them. Women threaded the pork chunks onto wooden skewers to look like drumsticks. They rolled each skewer in flour, then beaten egg, then breadcrumbs. The mock legs fried in a pan with a little grease until golden. Then they went into the oven to cook through. The finished product looked exactly like fried chicken legs. Kids grabbed them by the skewer and ate them like drumsticks. The pork tasted mild, and the breading made it crispy. Nobody knew it wasn't chicken. The meal cost about 30 cents for enough to feed everyone. Mock chicken legs felt fancy, even though they were made from cheap scraps. After real chicken became affordable, the recipe disappeared. Skewering pork seemed pointless when you could just buy chicken. Today almost nobody has heard of city chicken or understands why anyone would fake it. Goulash was the easiest Depression dinner to make. 1 pot, everything dumped together, no skill required. Women browned a little ground beef in a pot. Chopped onions went in next. A can of tomatoes poured over the meat. Uncooked elbow macaroni stirred into the tomato mixture. Water or broth added if needed. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings. The whole pot simmered for 20 minutes until the macaroni softened. The pasta absorbed the tomato and beef flavor. Everything cooked together into a thick, saucy meal. It cost about 20 cents and fed 6 people easily. Goulash was filling and tasted good enough. Kids liked it because the macaroni made it feel like a treat. After the Depression, goulash stayed popular because it was so easy. but modern versions use more meat and add vegetables. Depression goulash was mostly pasta, with a little meat for flavor. Today's version is much richer and more expensive to make. Vegetable loaf looked exactly like meatloaf, but contained no meat whatsoever. Women cooked dried beans until soft, then mashed them completely smooth. Grated carrots, chopped onions, and breadcrumbs mixed into the bean paste. Eggs bound everything together so it would hold its shape. Salt, pepper, and maybe a little ketchup for flavor. The mixture pressed firmly into a loaf pan. It baked for 45 minutes until the top turned brown. The loaf sliced cleanly, just like meatloaf. Families served it with brown gravy and mashed potatoes. Children had no idea they weren't eating meat. The beans provided protein without the cost. The whole loaf cost about 20 cents. After meat became affordable again, vegetable loaf disappeared completely. Nobody wanted fake meatloaf when real meat was available. The recipe seemed like a sad substitute that reminded people of hard times. Today, vegetarian loaves exist, but they're fancy and expensive. The simple Depression bean loaf is forgotten. These first 5 dinners represent the cleverest Depression-era tricks. Casseroles that cook themselves. Meatloaf stretched with bread. Pork disguised as chicken. Goulash made in one pot. Beans shaped like meat. The next 5 show how families turned bones, flour, and cabbage into complete dinners. Chicken noodle soup during the Depression came from one chicken that fed a family for 3 days. The first day, the chicken was roasted. The second day, leftover meat made sandwiches. The third day, the carcass boiled for soup. Women put the picked-over bones in a pot with water, salt, and maybe a carrot or onion. The bones simmered for hours to extract every bit of flavor. The broth strained clear. Homemade noodles cut from flour and eggs went into the boiling broth. Any tiny bits of chicken left got added back. The soup was mostly noodles and broth with almost no chicken. It cost about 20 cents if you counted the original chicken divided by 3 days. The soup was thin and simple, but it was hot. Today's chicken noodle soup has chunks of meat and vegetables. Depression soup was just flavored broth with noodles. Nobody makes it that plain anymore. Flour dumplings in gravy was dinner when there was absolutely nothing else. Women made brown gravy from flour, water, and bacon grease. The gravy simmered in a pot while they mixed up dumplings. Flour and water made a stiff dough with just a pinch of salt. The dough got rolled thin and cut into strips or squares. The raw dumplings dropped into the simmering gravy. They cooked for 15 minutes until they puffed up and became tender. The dumplings absorbed the gravy and became soft and filling. The whole meal was just flour, water, and grease. It cost about 10 cents. There was no meat, no vegetables, nothing but carbs and grease. But it filled my stomach and gave me energy for work. Children ate it without complaint because there was nothing else. After the Depression, this meal disappeared immediately. Nobody wanted to remember eating flour paste for dinner. Today the idea sounds impossible, but thousands of families survived on it. Beef cabbage soup stretched a tiny bit of beef into a huge pot. Women bought soup bones with a little meat still attached for 5 cents. The bones boiled in water for hours to make broth. Any meat that fell off the bones went back in. Chopped cabbage filled the pot, maybe a potato or carrot if available. The whole thing simmered until the cabbage turned soft. Salt and pepper seasoned it. The soup was mostly cabbage and broth with tiny bits of beef. One pot fed a family for 2 days. It cost about 18 cents total. The soup was boring and bland, but it was filling. Cabbage was the cheapest vegetable available, and it grew huge heads. After the Depression, people were sick of cabbage. They'd eaten it too many times in too many ways. The soup disappeared from tables. Today, most people only make cabbage soup when they're on a diet. Nobody thinks of it as real dinner anymore. Johnny Marzetti casserole came from an Italian restaurant in Ohio during the 1920s. The recipe spread during the Depression because it was cheap and filling. Ground beef browned with onions in a pan. Canned tomatoes or tomato soup stirred into the meat. Cooked elbow macaroni mixed with the meat sauce. The whole thing went into a baking dish. If the family had cheese, a little got sprinkled on top. The casserole baked until bubbling hot. It cost about 25 cents and fed 8 people. The dish was basically goulash baked in the oven instead of cooked on the stove. Families loved it because it felt fancier than plain goulash. The baked cheese on top made it special. After the Depression, Johnny Marzetti stayed popular in Ohio but disappeared everywhere else. The rest of the country forgot about it completely. Today, almost nobody outside Ohio has heard of it. The casserole that fed millions is now just a regional curiosity. Hamburger soup turned a little ground beef into a big pot of dinner. Women browned half a pound of beef in a pot. Chopped onions went in next. Water or broth poured over the meat. Whatever vegetables existed got added, usually potatoes, carrots, and maybe celery. Canned tomatoes went in if available. The whole pot simmered for an hour until the vegetables softened. The soup was thin and the meat was sparse, but it filled bowls. It cost about 22 cents for enough to feed 6 people. Families ate it with bread to make it more filling. The soup was simple and plain, but it was hot food. Children liked it better than plain vegetable soup because it had meat. After the Depression, hamburger soup stayed popular for a while, but eventually people wanted thicker, richer soups with more meat. The watery Depression version disappeared. Today's hamburger soup has chunks of beef and thick broth. Nobody makes it thin and stretched anymore. The first 10 dinners show how families stretched meat, faked chicken, and survived on flour and water. Casseroles layered without stirring. Meatloaf that was mostly bread. Soup made from bones. The next 10 dinners continue with more clever ways to make cheap ingredients feed hungry families. Brunswick stew came from the South and used whatever meat scraps were available. During the Depression, families made it with 1 chicken or a rabbit if someone hunted. The meat boiled in water until it fell off the bones. Every scrap of meat went back into the pot. Lima beans, corn, tomatoes, and potatoes filled the rest. Onions added flavor. The stew simmered for hours until everything broke down into a thick mixture. You could barely tell what was meat and what was vegetable. Everything melted together. The stew was filling and tasted rich, even though it had very little meat. 1 pot fed a family for 2 days. It cost about 25 cents if you had to buy a chicken, less if you caught a rabbit or squirrel. Brunswick stew felt special because it had meat in it. Most Depression meals didn't. Families served it at church suppers and community gatherings. Everyone brought what they could contribute. After the Depression ended, Brunswick stew stayed popular in the South, but changed completely. Modern versions use multiple types of meat and lots of vegetables. The ratio flipped. Depression Brunswick stew was mostly vegetables with a little meat for flavor. Today's version is thick with meat and expensive to make. The watery Depression version disappeared. Young Southerners have never tasted the original poor man's Brunswick stew. They only know the rich modern version served at barbecue restaurants. The Depression recipe that fed thousands is completely forgotten now. Tuna noodle casserole became popular during the Depression because canned tuna was cheap and lasted forever. A can of tuna cost 10 cents. Women cooked egg noodles in boiling water until soft. The noodles drained and went into a baking dish. The canned tuna dumped on top with all its oil. A can of condensed mushroom soup poured over everything. Some families couldn't afford the soup, so they made white sauce from flour, milk, and butter. The whole thing mixed together and baked until bubbling. If breadcrumbs were available, they went on top for crunch. The casserole cost about 20 cents total and fed 6 people. It was creamy, filling, and tasted good. Children liked it because the noodles made it feel like a treat. Tuna noodle casserole became one of the most popular Depression meals because it was reliable. The ingredients never went bad. You could always make it. After the Depression, the casserole stayed popular for decades. Mothers made it every week through the 1950s and 1960s. But eventually it became a joke. People called it poor people food and cafeteria slop. By the 1980s, almost nobody made it anymore. It seemed cheap and embarrassing. Today, tuna noodle casserole only shows up in retro cooking videos or as a childhood memory. Young people have never tasted it. The casserole that fed millions of families is now considered gross and outdated. The creamy, comforting dish disappeared from American tables completely. Spanish rice with beef stretched expensive rice by cooking it with tomatoes and a tiny bit of meat. Women browned a quarter-pound of ground beef in a pot. Chopped onions and maybe a bell pepper went in next. Raw rice stirred into the meat and vegetables. Canned tomatoes or tomato sauce poured over everything. Water or broth added to help the rice cook. Salt, pepper, and maybe a little chili powder for flavor. The whole pot simmered covered for 20 minutes until the rice absorbed all the liquid. The rice turned red from the tomatoes and became soft and fluffy. The beef was sparse, but every bite had a little flavor. The dish cost about 18 cents and fed a whole family. Spanish rice felt exotic and special even though it was just rice and tomatoes. The little bit of meat made it seem luxurious. Families ate it once or twice a week because rice was cheap and filling. After the Depression, Spanish rice stayed popular in the Southwest, but changed dramatically. Modern versions use much more meat and add cheese on top. The ratio flipped completely. Depression Spanish rice was mostly rice with a little meat for flavor. Today's version is thick with beef and covered in melted cheese. The simple Depression recipe disappeared. Young cooks have never made plain Spanish rice without tons of meat and cheese. The original poor man's version is forgotten. They don't know that Spanish rice was once a way to make a quarter-pound of beef feed 8 people. Porcupine meatballs got their name because the rice stuck out like quills. Women mixed ground beef with uncooked white rice. 1 egg bound it together. Chopped onion and salt added flavor. The mixture rolled into balls about the size of golf balls. Raw rice stuck out all over, like porcupine quills. The meatballs went into a pot. Tomato soup or tomato juice poured over them. The pot simmered covered for 45 minutes. The rice cooked inside the meatballs and absorbed the tomato flavor. The meatballs swelled up as the rice expanded. The rice stuck out even more after cooking. Each meatball was half meat, half rice. You could barely taste the beef, but the rice made the meat go further. 1 pound of beef made 12 large meatballs instead of 4. The dish cost about 22 cents and fed a family. Children loved porcupine meatballs because they looked funny and tasted good. The tomato sauce made them special. After the Depression, porcupine meatballs stayed popular through the 1960s. Mothers made them regularly because they were easy, and kids liked them. But eventually they fell out of fashion. People wanted real meatballs without rice filler. The recipe seemed cheap and Depression era. By the 1980s, almost nobody made them anymore. Today, young people have never heard of porcupine meatballs. The name sounds weird and unappealing. The meatballs that fed millions of Depression families are now just a forgotten curiosity. Modern meatballs are pure meat with breadcrumbs. Nobody mixes rice into them anymore. Poor man's stew was exactly what it sounds like. The poorest version of stew possible. Women fried sliced potatoes in a pan with a little grease. Chopped onions went in next. If the family had money, a few sliced hot dogs added protein. If not, just potatoes and onions. The whole thing fried together until the potatoes browned and softened. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings. Sometimes, a little water got added to steam the potatoes faster. The stew cooked in one skillet and took 15 minutes. It cost about 20 cents with hot dogs, 15 cents without. The meal was simple and plain, but it filled stomachs. The fried potatoes tasted good, and the onions added sweetness. Hot dogs made it feel like real food, instead of just vegetables. Children ate it without complaining because it was familiar. Poor man's stew appeared on tables 2 or 3 times a week. Potatoes and onions were always available. They never ran out. After the Depression ended, people stopped calling it poor man's stew. The name was embarrassing. Instead, they called it a potato skillet or fried potatoes. The recipe stayed the same, but the name changed. Today, fried potatoes with onions still exists as a side dish. Nobody serves it as the main course anymore. Nobody admits it used to be a complete dinner. The idea that potatoes and onions could be the entire meal seems wrong now. But during the Depression, poor man's stew kept families alive when there was nothing else to eat. 15 dinners down, 15 remaining. We've seen stews made from bones, casseroles with barely any meat, and meatballs stretched with rice. The next 5 continue with more Depression tricks. Cheap cuts of beef, canned fish, potatoes fried until crispy, every meal under a quarter. Haluski was a Polish dish that became popular during the Depression because it was cheap and filling. A whole head of cabbage cost 5 cents. Women sliced it thin like coleslaw. Egg noodles boiled in salted water until tender. The noodles drained and set aside. Butter or bacon grease melted in a large skillet. The sliced cabbage went into the hot fat and fried slowly. The cabbage had to cook until it caramelized and turned brown on the edges. That took 20 minutes of stirring. The cooked noodles tossed with the fried cabbage. Salt and pepper seasoned everything. That was the entire dish, just cabbage and noodles with butter. It cost about 15 cents and fed a whole family. Haluski tasted sweet from the caramelized cabbage and rich from the butter. The noodles made it filling. The dish was simple but satisfying. Polish families ate it every week because cabbage lasted forever in the cellar. After the Depression, haluski stayed popular in Polish communities but disappeared everywhere else. The rest of America forgot about it. Modern Americans don't understand how cabbage and noodles can be a complete meal. It seems like a side dish, not dinner. But during the Depression, haluski was a full meal that kept families fed. Today, young people have never heard of it. The dish only exists in old Polish neighborhoods where grandmothers still make it. The simple combination of cabbage and noodles that fed thousands is now just an ethnic curiosity. Nobody realizes it was once survival food for everyone, not just Polish families. Spaghetti casserole turned leftover spaghetti into a new meal. Women cooked spaghetti noodles in boiling water. The noodles drained and went into a baking dish. Sliced hot dogs mixed throughout the noodles. Canned tomatoes or tomato soup poured over everything. If the family had cheese, a little got grated on top. The casserole baked until bubbling hot. It cost about 18 cents and fed 6 people. The hot dogs made it feel like a real meal instead of just pasta. Children loved it because hot dogs felt like a treat. Spaghetti casserole was essentially spaghetti and hot dogs baked together. Nothing fancy or complicated, just cheap ingredients stretched to feed a family. After the Depression, the casserole stayed popular because it was easy and kids liked it. Mothers made it regularly through the 1950s, but eventually it fell out of fashion. People wanted real spaghetti with meat sauce, not hot dogs. The casserole seemed cheap and low class. By the 1970s, almost nobody made it anymore. Today, young people have never heard of spaghetti casserole. The idea of baking spaghetti with hot dogs sounds weird and wrong. Modern Americans eat spaghetti with marinara or meat sauce. Nobody mixes hot dogs into pasta anymore. The casserole that fed millions is now forgotten. It seems like an odd combination that doesn't make sense. But during the Depression, Spaghetti casserole was a creative way to make hot dogs and pasta into a complete baked dinner. The bubbling hot casserole filled stomachs when there was nothing else. A plain baked potato served as an entire dinner during the Depression. Not a side dish, the whole meal. Potatoes were the cheapest food available, and everyone had them. A 10-pound bag lasted a week. Women scrubbed the potatoes and put them directly on the oven rack. They baked for an hour until the skin crisped and the inside turned fluffy. Each person got one potato. That was dinner. Sometimes there was a tiny bit of butter or bacon grease to put on top. Most times there was just salt. The potato split open and steam poured out. The inside was white and soft. Everyone ate the skin too. Nothing got wasted. The meal cost about 8 cents to feed a family. It was boring and repetitive, but it kept people alive. Children ate baked potatoes every single day, sometimes twice a day. Potatoes for lunch, potatoes for dinner. After grocery stores started stocking more variety, baked potatoes became a side dish served with steak or chicken. Nobody ate them alone as the main course anymore. That seemed unfinished and sad. A baked potato needed something with it. But during the Depression, a baked potato was a complete meal. Families were grateful to have it. Today, people can't imagine eating a plain potato for dinner. It seems impossible and depressing. But it was normal during the 1930s. The plain baked potato kept millions from starving. Now it's just a side dish covered in butter, sour cream, cheese, and bacon. The simple survival food became a loaded indulgence. Red beans and rice came from Louisiana, but spread everywhere during the Depression. Dried red beans cost almost nothing and lasted forever. Women soaked the beans overnight to soften them. The beans boiled in water with an onion, and maybe a ham bone if available. Salt and pepper seasoned the pot. The beans simmered for hours until they turned soft and creamy. The cooking liquid thickened into gravy. Plain white rice boiled separately until fluffy. The beans ladled over the rice on each plate. If there was a ham bone, tiny bits of meat made it into the beans. Usually there was no meat at all, just beans and rice. The meal cost about 15 cents and fed a whole family. The combination was filling and provided complete protein. Beans and rice together gave all the nutrients bodies needed. Red beans and rice appeared on tables multiple times a week. Monday was traditional bean day in Louisiana because women were doing laundry and couldn't watch complicated meals. After the Depression, red beans and rice stayed popular in the South, but disappeared everywhere else. The dish seemed too plain and poverty-stricken. Northern families forgot about it completely. Today, red beans and rice, scalloped potatoes and onions turned cheap ingredients into something that felt fancy. Women peeled potatoes and sliced them paper-thin. A sharp knife and patience were required. The potato slices layered in a greased baking dish. Sliced onions went between each potato layer. Salt and pepper seasoned each layer as it went down. Milk poured over everything until it came halfway up the dish. Some families made white sauce from flour, milk, and butter instead of plain milk. A little butter dotted the top. The dish baked covered for an hour at 350 degrees. Then it baked uncovered for 30 minutes to brown the top. The potatoes absorbed the milk and turned creamy. The onions melted and sweetened. Everything became soft and delicious. The dish cost about 18 cents and served as the entire dinner. No meat, no other vegetables, just potatoes and onions. But the creamy texture made it feel substantial and satisfying. Scalloped potatoes felt like special occasion food, even though it was just potatoes. After the Depression, scalloped potatoes became a side dish served with ham at Easter or Christmas. Nobody ate them alone as dinner anymore. That seemed incomplete. But during the 1930s, scalloped potatoes and onions was a full meal. Families were grateful for it. Today, people serve scalloped potatoes with roast beef or ham. The idea of eating them alone seems wrong. Modern versions add cheese and heavy cream. The simple Depression recipe with just milk and onions is forgotten. Nobody makes it that plain anymore. 20 Depression dinners revealed. Cabbage fried with noodles. Spaghetti baked with hot dogs. Plain baked potatoes as full meals. Beans and rice without meat. Potatoes layered with milk. The final 10 dinners show the most common meals everyone ate weekly during America's hardest years. Creamed chipped beef on toast had a nickname that soldiers gave it during World War II. SOS stood for something we can't say in polite company. The military served this meal constantly because it was incredibly cheap and lasted forever without refrigeration. Dried beef came in glass jars and could sit on a shelf for years without going bad. The beef was heavily salted to preserve it. Women tore the dried beef into small shreds and soaked it in water for a few minutes to remove some of the overwhelming saltiness. Meanwhile, they made a simple white gravy on the stovetop. Butter melted in a pan, then flour stirred in to make a roux. Milk slowly added while stirring constantly, until the mixture thickened into smooth gravy. The drained beef pieces went into the hot gravy and simmered together for a few minutes. The beef softened slightly, but stayed chewy and salty. The whole mixture poured over slices of toasted bread on each plate. The toast soaked up the gravy and became soggy within seconds. The meal cost about 15 cents to feed an entire family. The dried beef was salty and had a strange texture, kind of leathery and tough. The gravy helped make it edible by adding creaminess and cutting the salt. The toast provided something to chew and filled stomachs. Nobody truly loved this meal. It was survival food, nothing more. Children complained about the salty taste and weird texture, but complaining didn't change what was for dinner. Families ate SOS once or twice a week because the dried beef was always available and never spoiled. After World War II ended, people were absolutely sick of creamed chipped beef on toast. Soldiers had eaten it in mess halls for years and hated it. When they came home, they refused to eat it ever again. The meal disappeared from most home kitchens almost immediately. People associated it with poverty, rationing, and military food. Nobody wanted those reminders. Today, creamed chipped beef on toast only shows up in old-fashioned diners as a retro breakfast item served to elderly customers who remember it. Young people have never tasted it and think it sounds disgusting. The combination of dried beef and white gravy seems wrong and unappetizing. Modern Americans eat fresh meat, not preserved dried beef from jars. The meal that fed millions during the Depression and war years is now considered gross cafeteria food. Nobody makes it at home anymore. The recipe exists only in vintage cookbooks and military history. The simple cream gravy and dried beef that kept families fed is completely forgotten. Boiled dinner was exactly what the name described. Everything boiled together in one enormous pot until soft. Women filled a large pot with water and brought it to a boil on the stove. Chunks of cabbage went in first because it took the longest to cook. Peeled potatoes cut into quarters went in next. Carrots, sliced thick, added some color. Onions quartered and thrown in. Sometimes turnips or other root vegetables if they were available. Everything boiled together in plain salted water. No herbs, no spices, no butter. Just vegetables and salt. The pot simmered for over an hour, until everything turned completely soft. The vegetables lost their individual flavors, and all tasted the same, because they cooked together in the same water. The cabbage turned pale and mushy. The potatoes fell apart. The carrots lost their crunch. Everything became the same texture and flavor. The cooking water turned into a thin, vegetable-flavored broth. Families drank this liquid like soup, because throwing away liquid meant throwing away nutrients. Nothing could be wasted. The entire meal cost about 15 cents. One pot fed 6 people for dinner, with enough left over for lunch the next day. Boiled dinner was bland, mushy, and boring. Nobody enjoyed it, but everyone ate it. The meal required no skill, no attention, and minimal ingredients. You just threw vegetables in water and waited. After the Depression ended and food became more available, people wanted their vegetables cooked separately with butter and seasonings. Boiled dinner seemed too institutional, like hospital food or prison food. It looked unappetizing and tasted bland. The mushiness was off-putting. Families stopped making it as soon as they could afford to cook vegetables properly. By the 1950s, boiled dinner had mostly disappeared except in the poorest households. Today, absolutely nobody boils all their vegetables together in plain water. The very idea seems wrong and disgusting. Modern cooking shows teach people to roast vegetables or steam them separately to preserve their individual flavors and textures. The concept of boiling everything together until mushy seems like a cooking mistake, not an actual recipe. Young people can't imagine eating a dinner where every vegetable tastes exactly the same and has the texture of baby food. But during the Depression, boiled dinner was a practical way to cook a complete meal with minimal fuel and effort. One pot meant one fire, which saved wood or coal. One pot meant one thing to wash. The simplicity was the point. Today, we've completely forgotten that cooking used to be about survival and fuel conservation, not about flavor and presentation. Corned beef hash turned canned meat and leftover potatoes into a filling skillet dinner. Canned corned beef cost about 12 cents and came in rectangular cans with a key attached to open them. The corned beef inside was pressed, salty, and had a strange pink color. It smelled strongly of salt and preservatives. Women dumped the whole can into a bowl and broke it apart with a fork. The meat was dense and chunky. Leftover boiled potatoes from a previous meal got diced into small cubes. If there were no leftovers, raw potatoes were peeled, diced, and boiled until just tender. Chopped onions added flavor and bulk. Everything mixed together in a bowl. A large cast-iron skillet heated on the stove with a little grease. The corned beef, potatoes, and onions went into the hot skillet. The mixture pressed down flat with a spatula. It fried without stirring for about 10 minutes. The bottom had to get crispy and brown. A spatula carefully flipped sections over to brown the other side. The goal was a crispy crust with soft interior. Salt and pepper seasoned it. The finished hash was crispy on the outside, soft inside, salty and filling. The meal cost about 22 cents and fed a whole family. Corned beef hash tasted better than most Depression meals because the crispy parts added texture and the onions added sweetness. Children liked it because it didn't look like regular dinner. After the Depression, corned beef hash stayed popular for decades. Diners served it for breakfast with fried eggs on top. Mothers made it regularly because canned corned beef was convenient and lasted forever in the pantry. But eventually, it fell out of fashion. People associated it with poverty and canned food. By the 1980s, almost nobody made it anymore. Young people had never tasted it. Today, corned beef hash only exists in old-fashioned diners as a retro breakfast item. The canned corned beef is considered low-quality mystery meat. Modern Americans want fresh ingredients, not preserved canned meat. The hash that fed millions is now considered gross diner food for old people. Nobody makes it at home. The can of corned beef sits forgotten on grocery store shelves. Young shoppers walk past it without knowing what it is or how to use it. The simple skillet meal that required one can of meat and leftover potatoes is completely forgotten. Modern hash uses fresh corned beef from the deli, not canned. The Depression version, with its pressed, salty canned meat, is gone forever. Potato cakes turned leftover mashed potatoes into a new meal so nothing got wasted. Women saved mashed potatoes from dinner and kept them in the icebox overnight. The next day, the cold mashed potatoes mixed with a beaten egg and a little flour. The egg and flour helped the potatoes hold together when fried. Salt and pepper seasoned the mixture. Some families added a tiny bit of chopped onion if available. The potato mixture shaped into flat patties like hamburgers, about half an inch thick. A cast iron skillet heated on the stove with grease or lard. The potato patties carefully placed in the hot grease. They fried without moving for about 5 minutes until the bottom turned golden and crispy. A spatula flipped them carefully to brown the other side. The finished potato cakes were crispy outside, soft and fluffy inside. They cost about 12 cents to make because potatoes were so cheap. The eggs were the most expensive part. Potato cakes served as the entire dinner with nothing else. Maybe a little gravy or ketchup if available, but usually just plain. The cakes were filling and tasted good because of the crispy exterior. Children liked them because they seemed like a treat, almost like hash browns. Families ate potato cakes 2 or 3 times a week because there were always leftover mashed potatoes. After the Depression ended, potato cakes became a breakfast side dish served with eggs and bacon. Nobody ate them as the main course anymore. That seemed incomplete and sad. A potato cake needed something with it. But during the 1930s, potato cakes were a complete dinner. Families were grateful to have them. The crispy, fried texture made them feel special, even though they were just leftover potatoes. Today, potato cakes still exist, but they're fancy. Restaurants serve them as appetizers with sour cream and chives. Modern recipes add cheese, herbs, and expensive ingredients. Nobody makes plain Depression-era potato cakes with just potatoes, egg, and flour. The simple version is forgotten. Young people have never eaten plain potato cakes as a main course. They only know the fancy restaurant version. The idea that fried leftover potatoes could be an entire dinner seems impossible. But during the Depression, potato cakes were a creative way to make leftover mashed potatoes into a new meal. Nothing went to waste. Every bit of food stretched to feed the family. The humble potato cake kept people fed when there was nothing else. Today we throw away leftover mashed potatoes without thinking twice. We've forgotten the ingenuity of Depression-era cooks who turned scraps into dinner. Salmon patties became popular during the Depression because canned salmon from Alaska was cheap and available everywhere. A can of pink salmon cost about 15 cents. The canned salmon was already cooked and preserved, so it lasted indefinitely on the shelf. Women opened the can and dumped the contents into a bowl. The salmon came out in a solid chunk with bones and skin still mixed throughout. The bones were soft from the canning process and completely edible. Many families didn't know they could eat the bones, so they picked them out. But nutritionists said the bones provided calcium and should be mashed into the mixture. The salmon got flaked apart with a fork. An egg mixed in to bind it together. Crushed crackers or breadcrumbs added bulk and helped the patties hold their shape. Chopped onion added flavor. Some recipes included a little bell pepper if it was available. Salt and pepper seasoned the mixture. The salmon mixture shaped into round, flat patties like hamburgers. A skillet heated with oil or grease. The salmon patties fried on both sides until golden brown and crispy. They had to cook about 4 minutes per side. The finished patties were crispy outside and soft inside with a fishy, salty flavor. The meal cost about 20 cents total and made 6 patties. Salmon patties served as the entire dinner, sometimes with a slice of bread. The patties were filling and provided good protein. Children either loved them or hated them, depending on whether they liked fish. After the Depression, salmon patties stayed popular in the South for decades. Mothers made them regularly because canned salmon was convenient and affordable. But eventually, they fell out of fashion. People associated them with poverty and canned food. Fresh salmon became more available and seemed superior. By the 1990s, almost nobody made salmon patties anymore. Today, young people have never tasted them. The idea of using canned salmon seems wrong when fresh salmon exists in every grocery store. Modern recipes for salmon patties use expensive fresh salmon fillets, not canned. The Depression version, with its bones, skin, and canned texture, is completely forgotten. Food bloggers occasionally post about salmon patties as a retro curiosity or childhood memory, but nobody actually makes them. The can of pink salmon sits on grocery store shelves gathering dust. Young shoppers don't know what to do with it. The simple patties that fed millions of families are now considered old people food. The crispy, savory patties made from cheap canned fish are gone. We've forgotten that canned salmon once saved families from hunger. 25 dinners were completed, 5 remain. We've seen dried beef on toast, vegetables boiled until mushy, corned beef from cans, leftover potatoes fried crispy, and salmon shaped into patties. The final 5 dinners are the most common meals every Depression family ate weekly without fail. Hot dog and bean bake combine 2 of the cheapest ingredients into one simple baked dinner. Canned baked beans cost about 10 cents for a large can. A package of hot dogs cost another 10 cents and contained 8 hot dogs. Women opened the can of beans and poured them into a baking dish. The beans were already cooked and swimming in sweet tomato sauce. The hot dogs sliced into rounds, about ½ an inch thick. Some families left them whole, but slicing made the meat go further and mix throughout the beans better. The hot dog slices stirred into the beans. Some cooks added a little mustard or ketchup for extra flavor, but that was optional. The whole dish went into the oven and baked at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes until bubbling hot. The hot dogs heated through and their flavor mixed with the bean sauce. The beans got thicker and more concentrated. The top sometimes got slightly crispy around the edges. The meal cost exactly 20 cents and fed 6 people easily. Hot dog and bean bake was simple, required almost no preparation, and tasted good. Children loved this meal because hot dogs felt like a special treat. The beans were sweet and filling. Everyone ate it without complaining. Families served hot dog and bean bake once or twice a week because the ingredients never went bad and were always available at the store. After the Depression ended, the dish stayed popular for a while because it was so easy. Busy mothers appreciated that they could make dinner in 5 minutes. But eventually it seemed too simple and childish. Adults wanted real dinners with multiple components and vegetables. Hot dog and bean bake looked like something you'd serve at a children's birthday party, not a proper family dinner. By the 1970s, most families had stopped making it except as a quick lunch or camping food. Today, young people have never eaten hot dog and bean bake. The combination sounds weird and unappetizing. Why would you bake hot dogs with beans? Modern Americans want more complex flavors and presentations. The simple one-dish meal seems boring and poverty-stricken. But during the Depression, hot dog and bean bake was a beloved dinner that tasted good and filled stomachs. The sweet beans and salty hot dogs complemented each other perfectly. One pan meant easy cleanup. The ingredients never spoiled. The meal was reliable when nothing else was available. Today, we've completely forgotten how satisfying this simple combination was. We've lost the appreciation for meals that required almost no work and tasted good enough to make children happy. Meat and potato patties stretched a single pound of expensive ground beef by mixing it with cheap mashed potatoes. 1 pound of ground beef cost about 15 cents during the Depression. That pound normally fed only 4 people, but women discovered they could add 3 cups of mashed potatoes to that same pound of meat. Suddenly 1 pound fed 8 people instead of 4. The beef and potatoes mashed together in a bowl. A beaten egg helped bind everything. Chopped onion added flavor. Salt and pepper seasoned the mixture. Some families added a splash of Worcestershire sauce if they had it, but most didn't. The mixture looked pale because there was so much potato. You could barely see the meat. Everything got shaped into flat patties like hamburgers, about ½ an inch thick. A cast iron skillet heated with a little grease or lard. The patties carefully placed in the hot skillet. They fried on one side for about 5 minutes until browned and crispy. A spatula flipped them to brown the other side. The finished patties were half meat and half potato. They looked like hamburgers but tasted milder. The potato diluted the beef flavor significantly, but the patties were filling and provided protein. They sliced cleanly and held together well. The meal cost about 20 cents total and fed the entire family. Children ate these patties without knowing they were mostly potato. The shape made them feel like real hamburgers. Families served meat and potato patties with bread to make sandwiches, or just plain on a plate with gravy. After the Depression ended and beef became more affordable, people wanted real hamburgers again. Pure beef patties with no fillers. Meat and potato patties seemed like poverty food, a reminder of making do with less. The recipe disappeared quickly as prosperity returned. By the 1950s, hamburgers were all beef. Nobody mixed potatoes into ground beef anymore. That seemed wrong and cheap. Today, young people have never heard of meat and potato patties. The idea of mixing mashed potatoes into hamburger meat sounds bizarre and unappetizing. Modern hamburgers are pure beef, sometimes with breadcrumbs, but never mashed potatoes. Food culture has completely forgotten this Depression-era technique. We don't understand why anyone would dilute meat with potatoes. But during the 1930s, it was ingenious. Women figured out how to make expensive meat feed twice as many people. The patties tasted good enough, and nobody complained. Today we've lost that creativity born from necessity. We throw away leftover mashed potatoes instead of mixing them with meat. The resourcefulness of Depression-era cooks is completely forgotten. Sidoni mashfuli. Cabbage rolls took significant time and effort to make, but they fed a family cheaply and tasted good. A whole head of cabbage cost about 5 cents. Women brought a large pot of water to boil and carefully lowered the whole cabbage head into the boiling water. The outer leaves softened after a few minutes and could be peeled off carefully without tearing. Each leaf got laid flat on the counter. The process repeated until 12 leaves were ready. The filling mixed together in a bowl. A small amount of ground beef, maybe half a pound for the whole batch. Cooked white rice made up most of the filling. Chopped onion added flavor. 1 egg bound everything together. Salt and pepper seasoned the mixture. Each cabbage leaf got a spoonful of filling placed in the center. The sides folded in and the whole thing rolled up like a little package. Each roll secured with a toothpick so it wouldn't unroll during cooking. The rolls stacked carefully in a large pot or deep baking dish. Tomato juice or diluted tomato sauce poured over the rolls until they were mostly covered. Some families used tomato soup mixed with water. The pot simmered on the stove or baked in the oven for about an hour. The cabbage softened completely and absorbed the tomato flavor. The rice inside expanded and soaked up the meat juices. The finished rolls sliced cleanly and tasted savory and satisfying. The meal cost about 18 cents total. 1 head of cabbage made 12 rolls, enough to feed 6 people with leftovers. Cabbage rolls took over an hour to prepare because each one had to be rolled individually. But the effort was worth it, because they tasted good and felt special. The rolls looked fancy on the plate. Children liked them because they were individual portions. After the Depression, cabbage rolls stayed extremely popular in Polish, Hungarian, and Eastern European communities. Grandmothers taught their daughters and granddaughters to make them, but most Americans forgot about them completely. The time required to roll each one seemed like too much trouble when easier dinners existed. By the 1970s, only ethnic families still made cabbage rolls regularly. Today, young Americans have never tasted homemade cabbage rolls. They might encounter them at a Polish restaurant as an exotic dish. The recipe seems complicated and time-consuming. Modern cooks want meals that take 30 minutes, not 2 hours. The patient, careful work of rolling each cabbage leaf is completely foreign. We've forgotten that cooking used to require time and skill. Depression-era women spent hours preparing dinner because they had no choice. The beautiful, savory cabbage rolls that fed families for generations are now just an ethnic specialty. Stuffed potato pancakes turned raw potatoes into a complete meal with a little meat hidden inside. Women peeled and grated raw potatoes on a box grater. The grated potatoes released a lot of liquid. The potato shreds got squeezed hard to remove as much water as possible. The drier the potatoes, the better the pancakes held together. The grated potato mixed with a beaten egg and a spoonful of flour. Salt and pepper seasoned the mixture. Meanwhile, a tiny bit of ground beef browned in a pan with chopped onion. Just a few tablespoons of meat per pancake. The cooked meat mixture became the filling. A spoonful of raw potato mixture went into a hot greased skillet and flattened into a circle. A spoonful of the meat filling placed in the center. Another spoonful of potato mixture covered the meat completely, sealing it inside. The pancake fried on one side until golden and crispy, about 5 minutes. Carefully flipped to brown the other side. The finished pancake was crispy outside with soft potato inside and a savory meat center. Each pancake cost about 12 cents to make. A few potatoes and a little meat made 6 large pancakes that fed the whole family. Children loved stuffed potato pancakes because biting into them revealed a surprise meat filling. The crispy exterior added texture. The pancakes were filling and tasted much better than plain potatoes. Families ate them with applesauce or sour cream if available, but usually just plain. After the Depression, stuffed potato pancakes mostly disappeared, except in Jewish and Eastern European communities, where they remained traditional. The rest of America forgot about them completely. The labor of grating raw potatoes seemed excessive when instant mashed potatoes became available. By the 1960s, almost nobody made potato pancakes from scratch anymore. Today, young people have never grated a raw potato to make pancakes. The process seems too difficult and messy. Modern potato pancakes use frozen shredded potatoes or instant potato flakes. Shepherd's pie during the Depression used whatever meat scraps were available, covered with mashed potatoes and baked. Traditional shepherd's pie came from England and used lamb, but Americans adapted it with ground beef because beef was cheaper. During the hardest times, families made it with hash browns on top instead of mashed potatoes because that was faster and easier. Women browned a small amount of ground beef in a skillet. Chopped onions and maybe a carrot, if available, went in with the meat. Canned peas or corn added bulk and vegetables. A little flour sprinkled over the meat mixture helped thicken it. Water or broth poured in to make gravy. Salt and pepper seasoned everything. The meat mixture simmered until thick and saucy. The whole thing scraped into a baking dish. Instead of making mashed potatoes from scratch, which required boiling and mashing, women simply covered the meat with raw shredded potatoes, either grated fresh or using frozen hash browns if they could afford them. The shredded potatoes spread evenly across the top. A little butter dotted over the potatoes if available. The casserole baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes. The potatoes on top turned golden brown and crispy. The meat mixture underneath bubbled and got thick. The finished casserole was hot, filling, and tasted good. It cost about 22 cents and fed 6 people. Shepherd's pie felt like a substantial meal because it had meat, vegetables, and potatoes all together. Children liked it because the crispy potato top was fun to eat. The casserole format made it feel special and homey. After the Depression, shepherd's pie remained popular for decades as classic comfort food. But the hash brown version disappeared. People went back to using proper mashed potatoes on top because that was traditional and looked better. The hash brown shortcut seemed lazy and wrong. By the 1970s, shipwreck casseroles, mock chicken legs, flour dumplings in gravy, all vanished without a trace. Today, young Americans have never heard of these dinners. The names sound strange and unappealing. Canned corned beef, dried beef on toast, beans baked with hot dogs. Modern food culture has moved so far from Depression-era cooking that these meals seem impossible. We can't imagine eating potato cakes as dinner or boiling all vegetables together. But these 30 dinners kept millions of families alive through America's darkest decade. They deserve to be remembered, even if nobody wants to eat them again. The survival meals that saved a generation are now completely extinct.